There's something about human nature that most people don't recognize until they experience it firsthand. We often assume that people appreciate what they have simply because it's there. But the truth is, familiarity has a strange way of making even the most valuable things seem ordinary. That's not just true in relationship. It's true in every part of life. We don't think much about electricity until the power goes out. We don't fully appreciate good health until we get sick. We don't realize how much someone contributes to our lives until they're no longer showing up the way they used to. The same principle applies when it comes to communication. If you're always the one sending the text, making the call, checking in, asking how someone's doing, or trying to keep the conversation alive, something subtle begins to happen. Your effort becomes expected instead of appreciated. Not necessarily because the other person is selfish, but because the human mind adapts remarkably fast. Psychologists call this habituation. We get used to repeated experiences, and once something becomes routine, we stop noticing its value with the same intensity. That's why your absence can sometimes say more than your presence ever could. Now, this doesn't mean you should disappear to manipulate someone. It doesn't mean playing emotional games or trying to make someone jealous. Real maturity has no interest in manipulation. What it does mean is understanding that constant availability can sometimes hide your true value. When someone never has the opportunity to miss you, they also never have the opportunity to fully recognize what your presence adds to their life. Think about that for a moment. If every conversation begins because you started it, how would they know whether they actually want to talk to you? If every meeting happens because you arranged it, how would they discover whether they genuinely miss seeing you? Sometimes stepping back isn't about creating distance. It's about creating clarity. Clarity is one of the greatest gifts silence can provide. When you stop reaching out for a while, two things happen simultaneously. First, you gain valuable information. You begin to see whether the relationship has been fueled by mutual interest or by your constant effort. Second, the other person experiences a change in their emotional environment. The routine they've unconsciously relied on is interrupted. Suddenly, the message they expected doesn't arrive. The familiar check-in never comes. The voice they heard every day becomes quiet. That silence creates awareness. Human beings are wired to notice change far more than consistency. When something constant disappears, the brain immediately begins asking questions. Why haven't I heard from them? Are they okay? What changed? Those questions don't always appear because of romance alone. They appear because our minds are designed to detect differences in patterns. That's why absence has power. Not because absence is magical, but because contrast creates awareness. Here's where many people make a mistake. They think the goal is to make someone chase them. That's the wrong objective. Chasing is temporary. Appreciation is lasting. You don't want someone running after you because they're afraid of losing control. You want them reaching towards you because they've realized your presence genuinely enriches their life. Those are two completely different motivations. One comes from insecurity, the other comes from gratitude, and gratitude builds stronger relationships than fear ever will. Steve Harvey has often talked about the importance of recognizing your own value before expecting someone else to recognize it. There's wisdom in that idea because people often teach others how to treat them without realizing it. If you constantly communicate the message that you'll always be there, regardless of how little effort the other person gives, that pattern becomes the standard. Relationships naturally settle into whatever standards both people accept. If one person carries all the emotional weight, eventually that imbalance feels normal. That's why stepping back isn't necessarily walking away. Sometimes it's simply refusing to continue carrying something that was always meant to be shared. Mutual effort is the foundation of every healthy connection. Imagine two people rowing a boat across a lake. If only one person is rowing while the other simply watches, the boat still moves, But one person becomes exhausted while the other never learns the value of contributing. Eventually, the one doing all the work starts asking an important question. If I stop rowing, what happens? That question isn't selfish, it's necessary. Because healthy relationships aren't measured by how much one person can endure. They're measured by how willing both people are to participate. When you stop reaching out for a while, you're not just observing their behavior, you're also observing your own. You begin to notice how much emotional energy you've been spending trying to maintain something that may never have required that much effort in the first place. You realize how often you've mistaken persistence for connection. There's an important philosophical idea that applies here. What has value should never require you to abandon your dignity. Too many people confuse love with endless sacrifice. They believe proving affection means always being available, always understanding, always forgiving, always initiating. But love without reciprocity slowly becomes emotional labor. And emotional labor, when carried alone, eventually becomes emotional exhaustion. Your silence gives both people an opportunity to see reality without interference. If they notice, if they reach out, if they wonder where you've been, then you've learned something meaningful. If they don't, you've learned something equally meaningful. Either way, you've gained clarity instead of living on assumptions. And assumptions have ended more relationships than honest conversations ever have. There's confidence in allowing people the space to choose you freely. Confidence doesn't demand attention every hour. Confidence doesn't force conversations that naturally want to happen. Confidence understands that genuine interest doesn't disappear because you stopped sending one more text. People who truly value your presence don't need constant reminders that you exist. They notice, they remember, they reach back. Not because they're obligated to, but because your absence reminds them of something your constant presence once allowed them to overlook. That's the real lesson. Sometimes the quietest moment reveals the loudest truth. And when your absence finally speaks, pay close attention to who listens. Once you've experienced what silence can reveal, the next question becomes even more important. What does someone's response to that silence actually tell you? This is where many people become confused. They spend so much time trying to interpret words that they overlook behavior. Yet behavior has always been the most honest language human beings speak. Words can be carefully chosen, promises can be made in moments of emotion, intentions can sound beautiful, but consistent action has a way of exposing reality. When you stop reaching out, you're not creating a test. You're removing the constant support that may have been carrying the relationship. What remains is often the truth. If a man genuinely values your presence, your silence doesn't go unnoticed. He may not react immediately. Every person communicates differently. Some people process emotions internally before expressing them. Others respond quickly. But genuine interest has one thing in common. It moves people toward connection rather than away from it. Think about the people who matter most in your own life. If someone close to you suddenly disappeared from your daily routine, wouldn't you notice? Wouldn't you wonder if something was wrong? Wouldn't your mind naturally drift toward them? That reaction isn't about obligation. It's about emotional investment. Psychologists often describe attention as one of the clearest indicators of importance. We naturally devote mental energy to what we value. Our minds repeatedly return to the people, goals, and experiences that hold significance in our lives. This is why someone who truly cares doesn't have to remind themselves to think about you. You simply enter their thoughts because you've become part of their emotional world. That's a powerful distinction. Real interest isn't forced, it's natural. Too often, people mistake occasional affection for genuine commitment. Someone might send a sweet message after you've reached out first 10 times in a row. They may respond warmly whenever you initiate the conversation. But there's an important question hiding beneath that pattern. Would this interaction exist if you hadn't created it? That's where silence becomes revealing. When your voice is no longer filling the space, the other person's intentions have room to express themselves. If they care, they'll bridge the gap. If they don't, the gap simply remains. Neither outcome is pleasant if you're hoping for a certain answer, but both outcomes are valuable because truth is always more useful than uncertainty. Many relationships don't end because love disappears. They struggle because one person is living on hope while the other is living on convenience. Hope says maybe they'll change. Convenience says things are fine because someone else keeps making the effort. Those are two very different realities. Steve Harvey has often emphasized that people reveal themselves through what they consistently do, not through what they occasionally say. That's practical wisdom because consistency is difficult to fake. Anyone can show interest for a day. Anyone can make promises during an emotional conversation. But genuine care survives beyond moods. It appears in ordinary moments. It shows up without being chased. One of the greatest mistakes people make is confusing potential with reality. They fall in love with who someone could become instead of honestly evaluating who that person already is. Potential is inspiring, reality is informative. And successful relationships are built on reality. When someone repeatedly chooses to contact you, asks how you're doing, remembers details you've shared, or simply wants to hear your voice without being prompted, they're communicating something far deeper than attraction. They're communicating intention. Intention creates effort. Effort creates trust. Trust creates stability. Without effort, relationships slowly become one-sided conversations disguised as partnerships. There's another psychological principle worth understanding here. Human beings invest in what they believe has value. We protect what matters. We maintain what we don't want to lose. Whether it's a career, a friendship, a family member, or a dream, our priorities become visible through our actions. Relationships are no different. If someone continually invests time, attention, and emotional energy into knowing you, they're demonstrating value, not perfection, value. Because nobody communicates perfectly. Everyone gets busy. Everyone has stressful weeks. Everyone faces moments where life demands attention elsewhere. That's normal. The difference isn't perfection. The difference is returning. People who genuinely care find their way back. They don't allow silence to become permanent simply because maintaining the connection requires effort. That effort matters because it demonstrates intentionality. Now, let's be careful here. This isn't about expecting constant communication every hour of the day. Healthy people have careers, responsibilities, families, ambitions, and personal goals. Mature love doesn't demand endless availability. It values consistency over intensity. A short message that sincerely says, I was thinking about you, often carries more weight than endless conversations filled with distraction. Presence isn't measured by quantity, it's measured by quality. This understanding also protects you from chasing validation where it doesn't exist. Many people exhaust themselves trying to convince someone to care. They become better communicators, more patient, more forgiving, more accommodating. Yet none of those qualities can manufacture genuine interest. You cannot negotiate someone into valuing you. You cannot persuade someone into emotional investment. You cannot love enough for two people. That realization isn't pessimistic, it's liberating. Because once you accept it, you stop wasting energy trying to control another person's feelings and begin paying attention to something you actually can control: your own standards. Standards aren't walls designed to keep people out, they're filters designed to let the right people in. When you recognize that genuine interest naturally expresses itself through effort, you stop making excuses for chronic inconsistency. You stop translating silence into imaginary affection. You stop confusing mixed signals with hidden feelings. Clarity replaces confusion. Peace replaces anxiety. Self-respect replaces desperation. And something remarkable happens when you operate from that place. You become more attractive, not because you're pretending not to care, but because you're no longer asking people to prove your worth. You're allowing their actions to reveal their character instead. That's a position of strength. The right person won't be intimidated by mutual effort. They'll welcome it. They won't see communication as a burden. They'll see it as an opportunity. They won't disappear whenever consistency becomes inconvenient. They'll understand that every lasting relationship is built through small acts repeated over time. The strongest bonds aren't created by grand romantic gestures. They're built through ordinary moments of reliability. A message sent because someone genuinely wanted to know how your day went. A phone call made without needing a special occasion. A conversation that begins simply because your presence matters. Those moments may seem small, but they reveal something profound. People make time for what they truly treasure. So instead of asking whether someone's words sound convincing, ask yourself a better question. When the opportunity to choose connection is entirely theirs, what do they choose? Because interest that is genuine never has to be forced. It always finds a way to be seen. And that's the kind of truth that can change not only your relationships, but the standards by which you choose them. After you've learned what your absence can reveal, and after you've allowed someone's actions to speak louder than their promises, there is one final lesson that matters more than any relationship itself. It is the lesson that determines not only who you attract, but also how you experience your own life. That lesson is simple to understand but difficult to live. Your value cannot depend on someone else's attention. This is where many people lose themselves without realizing it. They begin a relationship as confident, independent individuals. They have hobbies, ambitions, friendships, and dreams. They know who they are. But slowly, almost invisibly, their emotional center begins to shift. Their mood starts depending on whether a text arrives. Their confidence rises and falls according to how quickly someone responds. A single unanswered message can create hours of anxiety, and a few words of affection suddenly feel like proof that everything is okay. When your emotional stability depends entirely on another person's behavior, you've handed them something they were never meant to carry: your peace. And no human being is capable of carrying someone else's peace forever. Psychologists often speak about internal and external validation. External validation comes from compliments, attention, approval, or recognition from other people. Internal validation comes from knowing your own worth regardless of whether anyone else acknowledges it. Here's the problem. External validation feels powerful because it arrives quickly. A message appears on your phone, and for a moment you feel seen. Someone compliments you, and your confidence rises. They tell you they miss you, and suddenly the uncertainty disappears. But those feelings are temporary. The moment the attention stops, the insecurity returns, demanding another dose of reassurance. It's an emotional cycle that never truly satisfies because you're constantly waiting for someone else to refill what should already exist within you. Real confidence works differently. It doesn't reject love or appreciation. It simply refuses to become dependent on them. Steve Harvey has often encouraged people to know their value before entering a relationship because confidence isn't something another person gives you. They may recognize it, they may admire it, they may strengthen it, but they cannot create it for you. That's your responsibility. And that's actually good news. Because anything built inside you cannot be taken away as easily as something borrowed from someone else's opinion. Consider this philosophical idea. Freedom begins the moment your identity is no longer controlled by circumstances outside yourself. If your identity changes every time someone texts you, ignores you, praises you, or disappoints you, then your emotional life is being directed by forces you don't control. That's not freedom, that's dependence. Healthy relationships aren't built by two people searching for someone to complete them. They're built by two complete people choosing to share their lives. There's an enormous difference. One relationship is driven by need. The other is driven by choice. Need often creates fear. Choice creates respect. When you genuinely value yourself, something remarkable begins to happen. You stop chasing people who are running away. You stop negotiating for basic respect. You stop explaining why you deserve honesty, consistency, or kindness. Those things stop becoming requests. They become expectations, not because you're arrogant, because you finally recognize that healthy love should never require you to repeatedly convince someone to treat you with dignity. Self respect changes your decisions before it changes your relationships. It teaches you that loneliness is uncomfortable, but losing yourself is far worse. Many people remain in emotionally draining situations because they're afraid of being alone. But being alone and being lonely aren't the same thing. You can sit in a crowded room and feel completely invisible. You can be in a relationship and still feel abandoned. At the same time, you can spend an evening by yourself, reading, learning, exercising, praying, creating, or simply reflecting and experience profound peace. The difference isn't the number of people around you, it's the quality of your relationship with yourself. That relationship influences every other relationship you'll ever have. When you enjoy your own company, you're less likely to tolerate people who consistently diminish it. When you have meaningful goals, your entire perspective shifts. Your days become filled with purpose rather than waiting. Instead of wondering why someone hasn't called, you're focused on becoming stronger, wiser, healthier, and more capable than you were yesterday. Purpose protects people, not because it eliminates pain, but because it prevents pain from becoming your entire identity. Think about the individuals you admire most. They almost always have something larger than themselves driving them: a mission, a family, a career, a faith, a dream, a calling. That larger purpose gives emotional balance. Relationships become an important part of life, not the entire definition of life. This is why personal growth is never a distraction from love. It prepares you for it. Every hour invested in your education, your health, your finances, your character, or your emotional maturity is an investment that benefits every future relationship you'll have. People often ask why confident individuals seem attractive. The answer isn't mystery, it's energy. People who have built meaningful lives don't approach relationships from desperation. They approach them from abundance. They're sharing a full life, not asking someone else to create one. That difference changes everything. It also changes how you respond to disappointment. When someone fails to appreciate your value, you no longer see it as proof that you're unworthy. You simply recognize that not everyone has the vision to recognize what they're looking at. That's an important distinction. A person's inability to appreciate you does not reduce your value. A museum doesn't lower the price of a masterpiece because one visitor walks past it without stopping. Its worth remains exactly the same. The challenge is remembering that when emotions are involved. And that's why discipline matters more than feelings. Feelings change, values endure. There will always be moments when you want to send another message, chase another explanation, or hold on to someone who's already letting go. Those moments don't define you. Your decisions do. Every decision either strengthens your self respect or weakens it. Every choice either reinforces your standards or compromises them. Choose often enough, and those small decisions become your character. Character, more than charm or attraction, determines the quality of your life. So continue becoming the kind of person whose happiness isn't built on another person's approval. Continue investing in your mind, your health, your faith, your purpose, and your future. Build a life so meaningful that anyone who joins it becomes a welcome addition, not the foundation holding it together. Because when you know your worth, silence no longer feels like rejection. It feels like direction. And the greatest relationship you'll ever build is the one that teaches you never to abandon yourself in order to keep someone else.